Every other race understood power. The Velthrani Dominion ruled through fear and conquest. Their warships darkened the skies of 1,000 worlds, and their soldiers had crushed rebellions on planets too numerous to count. The Kreth Syndicate built their empire on slavery, harvesting the bodies and minds of weaker species for profit. The ancient Thessari Consortium had been trading weapons since before humans learned to make fire. But humans? Humans built hospitals. They sent medical ships into war zones. They fed refugees that other species had abandoned. They negotiated peace treaties between enemies who had been killing each other for 10,000 years. When disaster struck any world, human aid workers were always the first to arrive and the last to leave. The galaxy found this behavior confusing, at best, and pathetic at worst. Ambassador Alina Vasquez stood before the Galactic Assembly on what seemed like an ordinary day. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and tired lines around her eyes. She had spent 20 years pleading humanity's case to aliens who rarely listened. Today, she was asking for sanctions against the Velthrani Dominion. Their forces had just destroyed a colony of peaceful farmers on the border world of Ketha Prime. 15,000 dead. Women, children, elderly, all of them burned from orbit because they had refused to pay tribute to the Dominion. Alina presented the evidence calmly. Satellite footage of the attack, recordings of the screams, images of the aftermath that made even some hardened delegates look away. When she finished, she asked the Assembly to condemn this act and impose economic penalties on the Dominion. The Velthrani ambassador rose to respond. High Sovereign Kethrol was ancient even by his species standards. His carapace scarred from countless battles, his compound eyes gleaming with cruel intelligence. He had personally ordered the destruction of Ketha Prime. He clicked his mandibles in a sound that passed for laughter among his kind. The humans speak of morality again, he announced to the chamber. Scattered chuckling rose from several delegations. Tell me, Ambassador Vasquez, what will you do if we refuse your little sanctions? Send more doctors to bandage our victims? Build another orphanage for the children we make? Alina kept her voice steady. We will continue to advocate for peaceful resolution to all conflicts. Precisely. Kethrol spread his arms wide, addressing the full assembly. Because that is all you can do. Humanity has no war fleet, no weapons of significance, no warrior tradition. You are the galaxy's charity workers, useful for cleaning up the messes that real powers make. Too weak and too soft to do anything else? He turned back to Alina with something like pity in his alien eyes. Go home, human. Build your hospitals. Feed your refugees. Leave the serious business of the galaxy to species with actual power. Sanctions vote failed. It was not even close. Alina returned to her quarters that night and sat alone in the darkness for a long time. She had heard speeches like Kethrol's 100 times before. The mockery no longer hurt. What hurt was knowing that he was wrong about humanity in a way that he could never understand. Humans had not chosen peace. Because they were weak, they had chosen peace. Because they remembered what happened when they did not, deep beneath the mountains of Earth, in vaults that required 17 separate authorizations to access. There existed files that most humans had never seen. Historical records from before the expansion, before humanity reached the stars, before they swore their oath of peaceful coexistence with the galaxy. These files contained the true history of human warfare. They documented the nuclear exchanges of the 21st, a century that had killed 3 billion people in 4 hours. They contained technical specifications for bioweapons that could have wiped out entire genetic lines. They held footage of autonomous kill drones hunting survivors through the ruins of cities, programmed to eliminate anything with a heartbeat. The Third World War had nearly ended humanity before it truly began. Humans had looked into the abyss of their own nature and seen something that terrified them, more than any alien threat ever could. They had seen themselves. The survivors had made a choice. They would never become that again. They would reach for the stars not as conquerors, but as healers. They would prove that humanity could be more than the sum of its darkest impulses. For 300 years, it kept that promise. But the files remained. The knowledge remained. And somewhere in the back of every human mind, the memory remained of what their species could do when pushed beyond all limits. On the colony world of New Helsinki, 12,000 light-years from Earth, a retired admiral named James Okonkwo received a priority transmission. James was 78 years old. He had served in the Terran Defense Corps for 40 years, commanding humanitarian missions and disaster relief operations across the galaxy. His wife had died a decade ago. His only child, a daughter named Amara, had followed in his footsteps. She worked as a doctor on a medical frigate called the Healing Hand, bringing aid to war-torn worlds. The transmission was from Terran Command. James read it 3 times, certain he had misunderstood. The Healing Hand had been intercepted by Velthrani raiders near the contested zones. The ship carried 2,000 aid workers, including 300 medical staff. They had been on their way to help survivors of a Kreth syndicate attack. The Velthrani had not simply destroyed the ship, they had boarded it first. They had hunted the unarmed humans through the corridors for sport. They had broadcast the entire massacre lived to their home systems as entertainment. The slaughter had lasted 6 hours. There were no survivors. James set down his tablet very carefully. His hands were not shaking. He had trained himself long ago to control such reactions. He walked to his window and looked out at the peaceful colony, where he had planned to spend his final years. Children played in the parks. Families ate dinner together. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. James opened a secure channel to contacts he had not spoken to in 20 years. Other veterans, other officers, men and women who remembered the old files, the old training, the old contingencies that humanity had prayed would never be needed. Then he opened a file on his personal system, a file that had been passed down through his family for generations. Waiting for a day that everyone hoped would never come, the file was called Omega Contingency. James Okonkwo began to read, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, the galaxy continued spinning. Unaware that everything was about to change, the emergency session of the United Terran Council was the largest gathering in human history. Representatives came from all 847 colony worlds. They traveled by fast courier and military transport, crossing vast distances in days that would normally take weeks. No one complained about the discomfort. No one asked why such urgency was necessary. They already knew. The great chamber on Earth could hold 15,000 people. Today, every seat was filled. More representatives watched through holographic links from orbiting stations and distant colonies. Historians estimated that nearly 70 billion humans were watching in some form. Council. President Marcus Webb stood at the central podium. He was 60 years old, a former diplomat who had spent his career building bridges between species. His hands trembled as he prepared to show the evidence. "What you are about to see is difficult," he said. "I apologize in advance. But you need to understand exactly what was done to our people." The holographic display is activated. The chamber watched in silence as the Velthrani raiders boarded the Healing Hand. They saw unarmed doctors and nurses running through corridors, desperately seeking shelter that did not exist. They saw the hunters laughing and taking their time, making sport of the chase. 2,000 humans died over 6 hours. The Velthrani had been thorough in their recording. Every death was captured. Every scream was preserved. The aliens had even provided commentary, critiquing each kill like judges at a competition. The final sequence showed Captain Yuki Tanaka. She was 63 years old, a grandmother who had spent 40 years bringing medicine and hope to suffering worlds. The Velthrani had saved her for last. Recognizing her importance, they had made her death last for hours. When the recording ended, President Webb spoke into the heavy silence. High Sovereign Kethril has issued a formal statement claiming responsibility for this attack. He called it. Webb's voice cracked. He took a moment to compose himself. He called it a lesson in galactic reality for the human children. No one in the chamber moved. The question before this council Webb continued, is one we have not faced in 300 years. Do we continue our commitment to peaceful resolution? Or do we invoke Article Omega? The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Article Omega was not taught in schools. It was not discussed in public forums. Most humans knew it existed only as a vague rumor, a dark contingency from a darker time, but every representative in that chamber knew exactly what it meant. In the early days of humanity's expansion to the stars, the founders had written a constitution for their new civilization. Most of it focused on peace and cooperation. But hidden in the final pages, written by survivors of Earth's last great war, there was a single clause that broke from everything else. Article Omega stated that in the event of existential threat or unforgivable atrocity against humanity, all restrictions on military development would be lifted. The old weapons could be rebuilt. The old strategies could be revived. The monster that humanity had locked away 3 centuries ago could be released. Admiral James Okonkwo rose from the veterans' gallery. His movement drew every eye in the chamber. I request permission to address the council, he said. President Webb hesitated. Admiral, this is highly irregular. The speaker list was set weeks ago. My daughter was on that ship. Chamber fell absolutely silent. Webb nodded slowly. The council recognizes Admiral James Okonkwo. James walked to the podium with the careful precision of a man who had spent a lifetime in military service. He looked out at the thousands of faces watching him, and at the billions more watching through screens across human space. 300 years ago, he began. My great-great-grandmother helped write the Pacification Accords. She was 19 years old when autonomous weapons killed 6 million people in her city in 11 hours. She survived by hiding in a sewage pipe for 3 days, drinking water that was more poison than liquid. He paused, letting the image settle. She believed that humanity could be better than that. She believed we could choose peace. She helped build the civilization we have today. A civilization of doctors and teachers and engineers. A civilization that heals instead of destroys. His voice hardened. For 300 years, we have kept faith with her vision. We have been kind. We have been patient. We have been good. And do you know what the galaxy has learned from our kindness? He answered his own question. They have learned that we are prey. The word echoed through the chamber. Species in this galaxy believes they know what humanity is: soft, weak, harmless. They mock us in their assemblies and slaughter our children for entertainment. They think our mercy is a character flaw, not a choice. James leaned forward, his old eyes burning with cold fire. They have never seen us fight. They have no records of human warfare in their databases because we never showed them. They look at 3 centuries of peace and assume it represents all of human history. He straightened. They are wrong. They are catastrophically, fatally wrong. And I am asking this council to show them the truth. He turned to face President Webb directly. I am asking you to invoke Article Omega. I am asking you to release everything. The weapons our ancestors sealed away. The strategies they swore never to use again. The part of human nature that we have spent 300 years trying to forget. I am asking you to show the galaxy what humanity can do. When we stopped choosing peace, the vote took less than an hour. It was unanimous. Across human space, ancient protocols activated. Sealed files unlocked. Dormant factories stirred to life. Engineers and scientists who had spent their careers building medical equipment suddenly found themselves reading technical specifications that made their blood run cold on 1,000 worlds. Shipyards that had never produced anything but cargo vessels and hospital ships began transforming. The first military vessels to bear human markings in 3 centuries started taking shape. They were not beautiful ships. Human military design did not care about elegance or tradition. These vessels were built with a single purpose: to destroy as efficiently as possible. James Okonkwo watched the first construction reports come in. He felt no satisfaction, only a deep, terrible sadness. Sorry, Amara, he whispered to his daughter's memory. I couldn't protect you, but I can make sure this never happens to anyone else's child. He began planning the war that would shake the galaxy to its foundations. 6 months after the council vote, High Sovereign Kethrel began to worry. Human space had gone completely dark. All 847 colony worlds had stopped communicating with the outside galaxy. Trade routes that had operated for centuries were suddenly abandoned. The endless streams of human medical ships and aid convoys that crisscrossed alien territory simply stopped appearing. It was as if humanity had vanished. Kethrel's advisors offered comforting explanations. The humans were mourning, they said, hiding in fear. Perhaps they had finally accepted their place in the natural order of things. Kethrel wanted to believe this, but something nagged at him. A warning from instincts sharpened by 8,000 years of warfare, he decided to send a scouting force to the human border. Just 30 warships, barely a patrol group by Velthrani standards. More than enough to handle anything the humans might have. The scout fleet jumped to the border system and found it empty. No human ships. No defensive platforms. Nothing but silence. They reported this discovery and waited for new orders. They never sent another. Message Kethrel dispatched 100 warships to investigate. These were frontline vessels, crewed by experienced warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. They arrived at the border, scanned for signs of battle or debris, and found nothing. Then they too went silent, now genuinely alarmed. Kethrel assembled the largest fleet the Dominion had gathered in a century. 2,000 warships, the pride of Velthrani military might. Enough firepower to crack continents. Enough soldiers to occupy entire star systems. He led the fleet personally. They arrived at the edge of human space and powered up their weapons. Kethrel prepared to deliver an ultimatum that would bring humanity to its knees once and for all. Then the humans arrived. They came out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Not dozens of ships, not hundreds, but thousands. The Velthrani sensors struggled to count them all, but the numbers were not what made. Kethrel's blood turned to ice. The ships themselves were nightmares given form. Velthrani warships were elegant things, the product of 8,000 years of refinement. They had graceful curves and polished hulls, designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. They were works of art as much as weapons. Human ships were not elegant. They were not designed to inspire anything except the desire to be somewhere else. These vessels bristled with weapons that Velthrani sensors could not identify. Their hulls were thick and angular, built for absorption rather than beauty. They looked like factory equipment that had been twisted into instruments of death, because that was exactly what they were. In 6 months, humanity had converted their entire manufacturing base to war production. Hospital ships had been gutted and refilled with weapons. Mining vessels had been armored and armed. Colony transports had been transformed into carriers for millions of autonomous drones. They had not built a military fleet. They had become one. At the center of the human formation hung something new. A vessel larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. 4 kilometers of adaptive armor and quantum-targeted weapons, controlled by an artificial intelligence. That could calculate 10 million tactical scenarios every second. Its name was painted on the hull in letters that sensors could read from 1,000 kilometers away. Remembrance. Admiral James. Okonkwo's voice broadcast across all frequencies. It was calm, almost conversational. Velthrani fleet. This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Terran Navy. You are in violation of human sovereign space. You have 30 seconds to withdraw. Kethrel stared at his displays in shock. 30 seconds? This human was giving him 30 seconds. The insult snapped him out of his paralysis. He was High Sovereign of the Velthrani Dominion. He had conquered 100 worlds. He would not be threatened by charity workers playing at war. All ships, he commanded. Open fire. 2,000 Velthrani warships unleashed their weapons at the human fleet. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Later, military analysts from a dozen species would study the recordings of that engagement. They would watch them hundreds of times, slowing down each moment, trying to understand what they were seeing. They would fail. Human warfare did not follow galactic conventions. There were no formations, no ritualized exchanges, no honorable single combat between champions. The humans fought like a swarm, each ship moving independently, but coordinating perfectly with every other. Their weapons were beyond anything the analysts had seen. Railguns that accelerated projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed, plasma systems that could burn through shields designed to withstand nuclear blasts, electronic warfare suites that turned Velthrani ships against their own allies, and the drones. Millions of autonomous drones, each one carrying enough explosive power to cripple a cruiser. They moved through the Velthrani fleet like a plague, finding weak points that organic crews could never have spotted when it was over. 2,000 Velthrani warships had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris and frozen bodies. The human fleet had lost 4 vessels. Kethril escaped in a personal shuttle, the only survivor of his command ship. He watched through the tiny viewport as the humans methodically destroyed the last remnants of his fleet. Then Admiral Okonkwo's voice came again, broadcast to the entire galaxy, to all species and governments. Humanity's period of peaceful engagement has ended. For 300 years, we offered you friendship. We extended our hand. You took our children and killed them for sport. The Admiral paused. When he continued, his voice carried the weight of something ancient and terrible. There will now be a reckoning. This is not a threat. This is not a warning. This is simply what happens next. We did not start this war, but we will finish it. Across the galaxy, species that had laughed at humanity for centuries watched the battle recordings with growing terror. They watched 2,000 Velthrani warships die in 11 minutes, and they understood something that changed. Everything, the humans had not been weak. They had been waiting, and now they were coming. The Velthrani. Dominion had ruled through fear for 8,000 years. They had crushed rebellions, exterminated rival species, and broken the will of civilizations that had existed since before the Velthrani. Discovered fire, they had never faced anything like humanity. In the first 90 days of the war, human forces liberated 47 star systems that had been under Velthrani occupation. They did not advance slowly or carefully. They moved through Dominion space like a wildfire. Appearing in systems before defenders even knew they were under attack, the galaxy had assumed that humans, as newcomers to warfare, would fight like beginners, clumsy, uncertain, easy to predict. They were wrong. Human warfare was not clumsy. It was terrifying. The Velthrani believed in honorable combat. Their fleets formed traditional battle lines. Their admirals challenged each other to single combat, and their victories followed ancient rituals that had not changed in millennia. War was almost sacred to them, governed by rules that every civilized species understood. Humans did not care about honor. Humans cared about winning. They used tactics that made Velthrani commanders physically sick. Autonomous kill swarms that could hunt through enemy territory for months without human oversight. Stealth ships that hid in asteroid fields, waiting for supply convoys to pass before striking. Electronic weapons that convinced Velthrani ships that their allies were enemies. Human commanders did not challenge their opponents to single combat. They identified the enemy command ship and killed it first, leaving the rest of the fleet confused and leaderless. But the strangest thing about human warfare was not the brutality, it was the mercy. Every Velthrani soldier had been taught that capture meant torture. Their species had practiced ritual execution of prisoners for thousands of years. When human forces began taking Velthrani captives, the prisoners expected the worst. What they received confused them completely. Captured, Velthrani were given medical care for their wounds. They received adequate food and clean water. They were allowed to communicate with their families. Human guards learned their names and spoke to them with something that almost resembled respect. Many prisoners were eventually released. They returned to Dominion. Space with stories that spread like disease through the Velthrani military. Stories of human doctors treating enemy wounded before their own. Stories of prison camps that felt more like protective shelters than punishment. Stories of a species that could kill with terrifying efficiency, but chose not to. Slaughter those who surrendered. A captured Velthrani officer named Threcavel found the courage to ask his human guard about this contradiction? Do not understand, he said through the translation device. Your people have destroyed our fleets. You have killed millions of our soldiers. You have the power to slaughter us all. Why show mercy now after what we did to your aid workers? The guard was a young woman from Mars named Sophia Chen. She had joined the military the day after the Healing Hand massacre, signing up to avenge the doctors and nurses who had been her personal heroes since childhood. She looked at Thrikaval with something that might have been pity. Yes. We are not trying to become you, she said. We are trying to end you. There is a difference. Thrikaval did not understand, but he remembered her words long after his release. Meanwhile, the Galactic Assembly watched the war with growing panic. Species that had mocked humanity for centuries now saw them as an existential threat. Proposals emerged to form coalition forces against the human menace. Old enemies considered alliances they would have thought impossible just months before. Ambassador Alina Vasquez still represented humanity at the assembly. She had requested the posting herself, even though many colleagues thought she was insane to enter a room full of species that now feared and hated her. She addressed the assembly on the war's 100th day. You're afraid, she said simply. You should be. For 300 years, we told you who we were. Healers, builders, teachers. You did not believe us. You thought it was weakness? Now you are seeing the other thing we can be. She let the words hang in the air. You want to know if we will come for you next? You want to know if this war will end with the Dominion or spread across the galaxy? You want to know if you should be preparing your own fleets? Alina leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. Here's the truth you have never understood about humanity. We can be monsters. We have proven this many times, usually to ourselves. Our history is filled with horrors that would make Velthrani atrocities look like children's games. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, but we can also choose not to be monsters. We are the only species in this galaxy that has looked into the abyss of our own nature and chosen to turn away. We spent 300 years proving that we could be better than our instincts. Her voice hardened. The Dominion made us remember what we used to be. They made that choice, not us. We will destroy them because they have proven they cannot be allowed to continue. There is no negotiation possible with a culture that slaughters unarmed aid workers for entertainment. She spread her hands. Out. But when the Dominion falls, we will offer you the same choice we offered before. Peace, cooperation, mutual aid. We will build hospitals on your worlds and teach in your schools and feed your hungry, just as we always have. The choice will be yours. It always was. She sat down. The assembly remained silent for a very long time in the months that followed. No coalition formed against humanity. No alien fleets rushed to defend the Dominion. Species that had traded with the Velthrani for millennia quietly cut ties and pretended they had never been allies. Galaxy had learned something important. Humans could be the most gentle species in existence. They could also be the most terrifying. The difference was entirely up to how other species treated them. Most species decided that treating them well was the wiser choice. The war lasted 2 years in the end. The Velthrani Dominion did not fall in a single great battle. It crumbled piece by piece, system by system. As human forces methodically dismantled, 8,000 years of conquest. Subject species that had lived under Velthrani rule for generations rose up as human fleets approached. Slave populations turned on their masters. Puppet governments collapsed overnight. The Dominion's enemies, kept quiet by fear for millennia, suddenly found their courage. Human forces did not conquer these liberated worlds. They freed them and moved on, leaving behind humanitarian teams to help rebuild what the Dominion had destroyed. The final battle took place above the Velthrani homeworld itself. High Sovereign Cathrel had retreated there after escaping the first engagement. For 2 years, he had watched his empire disintegrate. He had ordered increasingly desperate attacks, sacrificing fleet after fleet against human forces that seemed to grow stronger with each victory. Now human ships filled the sky above his world. Admiral James Okonkwo broadcast a simple message. High Sovereign Cathrel, Your fleets are destroyed. Your empire has fallen. You may surrender now and face trial for your crimes, or you may continue fighting and watch your homeworld burn. The choice is yours. Kethrel chose to fight. It was a short battle. The remaining Velthrani defenders, exhausted and demoralized, fought bravely but hopelessly. Within hours, human ground forces were landing on the homeworld. They found Kethrel hiding in a bunker beneath his palace. The great conqueror, the terror of 1,000 worlds, was cowering in the dark while his soldiers died above him. He was taken alive. Admiral Okonkwo visited him once. In the sterile cell where the former High Sovereign waited for his trial, Kethrel had aged terribly in the 2 years of war. His carapace was cracked and dull, his compound eyes clouded with exhaustion and fear. Okonkwo sat down across from him. The Admiral had aged too. His hair was completely white now, and he moved with the careful slowness of a man who had pushed himself far beyond his limits. "I do not understand you," Kethrel said. "Any other species would have burned our worlds, exterminated our people. We would have done the same to you. Why haven't you?" Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. "'Cause extinction was never the point," he finally said. "My daughter is still dead. Your entire species dying would not bring her back. It would only prove that we had become what she spent her life fighting against." Kethrel shook his head, struggling with concepts his culture had never taught him. "But revenge is not justice," Okonkwo interrupted. "My daughter was a doctor. She believed that every life had value, even the lives of people who hated her. If I slaughtered your species in her name, I would be betraying everything she believed." He stood slowly, his old bones protesting. "You will face trial. The evidence of your crimes will be presented. The galaxy will judge you. Whatever sentence they decide, it will be carried out justly. Your people will be given the chance to rebuild, not as conquerors, not as masters. As one species among many, learning to live in a galaxy that no longer fears them." Okonkwo paused at the door. "It will take generations, but it is possible. Humans have done it ourselves." He left Kethrel alone with his thoughts. The trials lasted 6 months. Thousands of Velthrani leaders faced justice for their crimes. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. Most were sentenced to imprisonment. Some received lesser punishments. A handful, those responsible for the worst atrocities, received death sentences carried out without cruelty or spectacle. Kethrel was among them. The Dominion was formally dissolved. Its former subject species were granted independence. Peacekeeping forces remained to prevent revenge, killings, and help establish new governments. And then humanity did something that shocked the galaxy even more. Then their military campaign? They disarmed. Not completely. Never completely again. But the great war fleets were reduced and mothballed. The weapons factories returned to producing medical equipment and colony supplies. The kill swarms were deactivated and sealed away, hopefully forever. Ambassador Elena Vasquez addressed the Galactic Assembly one final time. "We have shown you what we can become," she said. "Now, we will show you what we choose to be again, as many times as necessary." She looked around the chamber at delegates who had mocked her for 20 years, who had dismissed humanity as harmless charity workers, who had learned too late how wrong they were. "We are humanity. We will help you build. We will heal your wounded and educate your children. We will negotiate your disputes and shelter your refugees. We will be what we always wanted to be." Her voice softened. "But remember this day. Remember what you saw us become when you pushed us too far. Remember that every hospital ship we send could be converted to war within months. Remember that every aid worker could be a soldier if we chose. We choose peace. We will always choose peace first. But if anyone ever makes us choose otherwise again," she did not need to finish the sentence. "The galaxy will tremble," she said simply. "But the choice is yours. It always was." The assembly was silent. In the years that followed, humanity returned to its old ways. Medical ships crossed the galaxy. Aid workers helped rebuild devastated worlds. Human teachers opened schools, and human engineers built infrastructure, and human diplomats negotiated treaties, but something had changed. The galaxy no longer laughed at human kindness. They understood now that it was not weakness. It was the most disciplined strength in existence. Every gentle word, every helping hand, every act of mercy was a choice made by people who knew exactly what violence they were capable of and chose something better. Admiral James Okonkwo retired to a small house on New Helsinki, not far from where he had received the message about his daughter 2 years before. He spent his remaining years tending a garden and teaching young people about the importance of restraint. He never spoke of the war unless asked directly. When he died, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87, his final request was honored. His ashes were scattered in space, near the coordinates where the healing hand had been destroyed. The memorial ship that carried them was named after his daughter. It was a hospital ship. Of course, humanity had remembered what it could be. Now, it was working very hard to forget again. And the galaxy, having learned its lesson at terrible cost, was more than happy to let them.